More than 40% of voters in America and Europe now see the opposing political party not just as wrong, but as a genuine threat to the nation. This isn't a policy disagreement, it's a holy war. And the reason why has nothing to do with modern politics, but everything to do with a 150-year-old philosophical crisis that we never solved. Think about the last time you scrolled through your feed and saw a political post that made your stomach clench. Not just disagreement, something deeper. Like that person was speaking a different language from a different reality. Here's the question nobody's asking. Why does politics feel like religion now? The answer is going to take us through Paris in 1945, a psychological experiment involving judges and mortality, and the darkest secret of human freedom itself. But by the end, you'll have a lens that makes sense of the madness. Let's start with a void. In 1882, a German philosopher named Friedrich Nietzsche wrote something that terrified him. He declared that God was dead, and we had killed him. This wasn't a celebration, it was a warning. For centuries, religion provided the central pillar holding up Western morality, purpose, and social cohesion. It answered the big questions. Why are we here? What should we do? What happens when we die? When that pillar collapsed, it left something behind. An existential void, a God-shaped hole at the center of human experience. And here's the evidence that the void is real. In the 1960s, nearly 75% of Americans trusted their government to do the right thing. Today, that number is below 20%. Religious affiliation in the US and Western Europe has been in free fall for decades, according to Pew Research. Trust in science, media, institutions, all collapsing. What if the most dangerous force in politics today isn't a particular party or policy, but a vacuum? Because here's what we've discovered about vacuums. Nature abhors them, and so does the human mind. When the old gods die, we don't become free. We become desperate for new ones. We search frantically for substitute gods, anything that can give us certainty, purpose, and a script for how to live. But here's what we haven't answered yet. What makes these substitute gods so often monstrous? Why do they demand purity tests and heretic hunts and absolute loyalty? To understand that, we need to go back to the philosophers who first stared into this void. Because what they discovered was terrifying. The one thing people fear more than oppression is total, absolute freedom. Let me take you to Copenhagen in the 1840s. A Danish philosopher named Søren Kierkegaard is walking through the streets, and he's writing about something he calls the dizziness of freedom. He's describing the paralyzing anxiety that comes from a specific realization. You, and you alone, are responsible for creating your own meaning in a meaningless world. There's no cosmic instruction manual, no divine plan spelling out who you. That's existential choice in its most raw and brutal form. And this crisis wasn't limited to Europe. In late 19th century Japan, the Meiji Restoration forced the sudden abandonment of centuries of feudal tradition. The country was opened to the West almost overnight, and suddenly every certainty was gone. What followed was a frantic national search for a new kokutai, a national essence, a new story that could tell the Japanese people who they were and what their lives meant. Because that's the pattern. When the old meaning structures collapse, the search for new ones becomes desperate, frantic, and often dangerous. So here's the question we've opened. If freedom is so psychologically painful, what are the escape routes? What mechanisms do our minds use to get rid of this burden? The answer comes from a psychoanalyst who watched an entire nation do exactly that. Your brain has a series of built-in escape hatches to save you from the terror of your own existence. The problem is, political movements have the keys. In 1941, a psychoanalyst named Erich Fromm published a book called Escape from Freedom. He was trying to answer a question that haunted him. How did millions of Germans willingly surrender their freedom to the Nazi Party? His answer was psychological, not political. After World War I, Germany was in chaos, the economy was shattered. The old social structures, the monarchy, the church, the rigid class system, had all collapsed. Germans had more political freedom than ever before, and they couldn't stand it. Because freedom isn't just a gift. It comes with psychological isolation, personal responsibility, and existential dread. And when that becomes unbearable, people will do anything to escape it. They'll surrender their individuality to a mass movement. They'll adopt a rigid ideology that tells them exactly who to be. They'll follow a charismatic leader who promises certainty and purpose. Not because they're evil, because they're terrified. Now let's bring this into the laboratory. In the 1980s, a group of psychologists developed something called terror management theory. The core idea is simple and disturbing. The fear of our own mortality makes us cling ferociously to our cultural worldviews. Why? Because our culture provides a kind of symbolic immortality. If you're part of a great nation, a righteous cause, or a movement that will outlive you, then in a sense you never really die. Here's where it gets dark. In one study, researchers reminded judges of their own mortality. Just a subtle prompt, nothing heavy-handed. Then they asked those judges to set bail for a prostitute. The judges who'd been reminded of death set bail at an average of $4.55. The control group? $50. Why? Because the threat of mortality triggered a primal need to defend their worldview, to punish anyone who violated the moral order that gives their life meaning. And this happens unconsciously, automatically, all the time. When your worldview is threatened by a political opponent, a cultural shift, or just someone who believes differently, your brain doesn't process it as a difference of opinion. It processes it as an existential attack. Now imagine a person sitting alone in their apartment, scrolling through their phone at 2 a.m. They feel invisible. Their job feels meaningless. Their relationships feel shallow. There's a gnawing sense that their life doesn't matter, that they're just drifting. Then they find it. A community, a movement, people who speak with absolute certainty about what's wrong with the world and how to fix it. Suddenly, they're not alone. They have a purpose. They have a mission. They have enemies, clear, identifiable enemies, and fighting those enemies makes them feel alive. The ideology doesn't just give them answers. It gives them an identity. It transforms their personal insignificance into cosmic importance. This is the psychological journey into radicalization, and it's not unique to extremists. It's the blueprint for how all of us form our political identities. Jonathan Haidt, in The Righteous Mind, explains that political tribes are so psychologically appealing because they provide off-the-shelf moral systems. They simplify the world. They reduce anxiety. They give you a clear us versus them story. And once you've adopted that story, once it's become the framework through which you see reality, questioning it feels like questioning your own existence. So here's what we've uncovered. The philosophical problem of freedom created a psychological need for certainty, and that need makes us vulnerable. But how has our modern digital world taken this ancient vulnerability and turned it into the engine of our current political madness? You are not the customer of your social media feed. You are the product, and your existential fear is the raw material. Let's bring this home. Let's talk about now. Remember the two motifs we started with? The existential void and the substitute gods? Here's where they collide. For millions of people today, the void left by the collapse of religion and community isn't being filled by new churches or civic organizations. It's being filled by political identity. The substitute god is the party, the ideology, the leader, and it demands the same absolute loyalty that the old gods did. Don't believe me? Listen to the language. Scroll through any political corner of the internet and count how many times you see words like heretic, blasphemer, purity test, or unclean. Political scientist Eitan Hirsch calls this political hobbyism. Politics as a high-stakes hobby that provides all the moral drama and tribal belonging of a fundamentalist religion without any of the actual civic engagement. You're not volunteering or organizing. You're posting, arguing, and feeling righteous. It's religion without the community, tribalism without the sacrifice.
And here's the genius and the horror of the modern ecosystem. The platforms you're on are not neutral. Shoshana Zuboff, in The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, explains that algorithms on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube are designed to maximize engagement. And what maximizes engagement? Outrage, fear, tribal conflict. The algorithm learns that when you see content that threatens your worldview, that triggers your existential anxiety, you can't look away. You comment, you share, you react. Your existential dread is being harvested for profit. Every time the algorithm shows you a post from the opposing tribe saying something inflammatory, it's not a bug. It's the business model, because your terror of meaninglessness keeps you scrolling. And this isn't just happening in the US or Europe. In Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro rose to power by offering a simple, emotionally satisfying narrative of national identity and traditional values to people who felt left behind by globalization. In India, Narendra Modi's party has transformed Hinduism from a diverse, pluralistic tradition into a rigid political ideology that provides certainty and purpose to millions. These movements aren't succeeding because of their policy platforms. They're succeeding because they fill the void. They offer a story, an identity, a mission. And here's the darkest part. Political theorist Hannah Arendt once wrote, "The ideal subject of totalitarian rule is not the convinced Nazi or the convinced communist, but people for whom the distinction between fact and fiction and the distinction between true and false no longer exist." Look around. We live in a post-truth environment where millions of people on all sides will believe anything, no matter how absurd, if it confirms their tribal identity. Not because they're stupid, because the alternative is the void. Admitting you might be wrong, that your side might not be righteous, that the world might be more complex than your ideology allows, it threatens the one thing giving your life meaning. So you don't. You double down. You find new enemies. You perform your loyalty louder, because the substitute God demands it. So here we are. We've diagnosed the disease. But what's the cure? The only way to win this game is to realize you are choosing to play it. Let me bring this together. The collapse of shared meaning created an existential void. The psychological terror of that void drives us to seek certainty. And modern political tribes exploit this drive, becoming our new angry gods. But you're not trapped. Because there's a tool the existentialists left us. They called it authenticity. Here's what it means. Every belief you hold, every political conviction, every tribal loyalty is not an objective truth you discovered. It's a meaning structure you have adopted to make sense of the world. Your political identity is a choice, and recognizing that changes everything. It doesn't mean your beliefs are wrong. It doesn't mean you have to abandon your convictions. It means you hold them differently. Instead of asking, "How do I prove I'm right?" you start asking, "Why have I chosen to believe this? Does this belief serve my freedom, or is it an escape from it?" That question breaks the spell of dogmatic certainty. It reintroduces humility. It transforms you from a soldier in a holy war into a person making conscious choices. Think of it this way. Viewing your politics like this is like the difference between a scientist and a priest. A scientist is willing to discard a theory if new evidence emerges. A priest's job is to defend the faith at all costs. In politics today, too many of us have become priests. But you don't have to be. You can choose your chains. You can acknowledge that the meaning structure you've adopted is exactly that, adopted. Not revealed, not absolute, chosen. And once you see that, you can choose again. You can hold your beliefs with conviction, but without fanaticism. You can engage with people who disagree without treating them as existential threats. You can be free. Not free from responsibility, not free from the burden of choice, but free from the tyranny of substitute gods who demand your soul in exchange for certainty. So here's my challenge to you. Pick one core belief you hold. A political conviction you're certain about. Something that feels obviously, objectively true. Now ask yourself, is this a fact or is this a choice I've made? Not to abandon it, just to see it clearly.
because the most dangerous beliefs aren't the ones we argue for. They're the ones we've forgotten we chose. What is one core belief you hold that you could try to see not as a fact, but as a choice you've made? How does that change your feeling about it?